Humans have a need to put everything into categories, and with that, we also have to group media, aesthetics, and vibes into boxes that roughly make sense, no matter how incoherent those similar pieces of media might be. Speaking of categories, the suffix punk originates from the mid-1970s as the punk movement developed. This was in part as a reaction to mainstream trends at the time, the development of music such as metal, and also opposing other subcultures like the hippie movement. Punk as a suffix first saw use in the word cyberpunk, in a short story literally named Cyberpunk by Bruce Bethke in 1983. And from there on, punk would be continuously used as a suffix to describe many genres of media, including steampunk, diesel punk, atom punk, and finally solarpunk. Before we dive into why solarpunk is problematic, let me show you my setup. Earlier this year, I moved into a new apartment, and finally I had my own dedicated space for an office. That didn't involve having my computer set up in the same room as my bedroom or living room. But that also made me painfully aware of how haphazardly I had my desktop set up and how badly I needed a desk upgrade. Luckily, Flexispot came to the rescue and offered help to fix that. Flexispot sent over their E7 Plus standing desk, which is way better stability-wise than my old IKEA table, and it can also work both in sitting and standing configuration. Weight is not an issue either, as it can easily handle my dual monitor setup and the desk can easily lift up to 540 pounds. So unless you have a rack of some of the biggest CRT monitors in existence, I don't think you'll ever stress the lifting motors. Along with the E7 desk, they also sent over the C7M chair, which was sorely needed as I finally had a chair with proper lumbar support for my frame. My old chair was clearly too short. Absolutely not a problem for the C7M. Easy to find comfort since the C7 also has adjustable armrests, headrests, and locking tilt controls. Flexispot has a 30-day return-free policy and has 10 to 15-year warranties on their products. Check out their website below and use this code for $50 off. Anyway, back to the video. Solarpunk can best be described as a genre that defines itself by defying the normal dystopian future worlds with a more positive, healthier, and prosperous future, which is enabled by green technologies and a shift from how resources are allocated, which also involves...
It's pure ideology, this ecological bullshit.
In other words, solarpunk is basically the millennial optimism of the 2010s mixed with green and renewable aesthetics. Generally, the genre takes very hopeful and colorful settings as Ghibli franchises like Castle in the Sky and Nausicaa, to games like Terra Nil and City Skylines Green Cities, to that goddamn yogurt commercial. We will talk about that later. All of these examples are mostly used for their aesthetics and less for their specific depictions of how we get to this future in the first place. And that's where the problems begin. You see, it doesn't matter how many 4-hour leftist video essays you write, upload, and watch about how solarpunk is gonna defeat capitalism, bro. The core of the issue is that the majority of the viewers have no idea what technologies, how to implement them, and what policies we need to build a sustainable green future. So even if capitalism is defeated and you get some luxury gay space communism future, you'll still be stuck with a group of people that fundamentally will not be able to accomplish their goals because they will be focused entirely on aesthetics and prioritizing form over function. I'll yell about this specific point more later. Unfortunately, like many of the suffix punks, too many people focus on the pure aesthetics of the genre and not how those worlds actually exist and operate. Granted, many of these genres like diesel and steampunk are mostly pure fantasy and usually were never supposed to be worlds rooted in reality. But that's where solarpunk is different. Majority of the time, it's using real or close to real technologies and concepts to build a better, more sustainable future. So it's easily the best one to critique because there are so many people out there that construct their hope and worldview around an optimistic future like those depicted in a cyberpunk reality. And with that, we have to talk about solarpunk's main failure, focusing too much on green infrastructure and not the gray infrastructure that's going to save us. Okay, let's take a look at the vibes of the yogurt commercial. One of the most frustrating aspects of Solarpunk is the focus on rural or suburban lifestyles. Solarpunk also makes people assume that the solution to living a more eco-conscious lifestyle just involves putting solar panels on their house and planting more trees. And declining media literacy doesn't help the average person in America see themselves not as the main character in the world, and they couldn't possibly be bothered with a change in their lifestyle for the sake of others. This thinking, and Solarpunk's focus on greenery, can generate misguided assumptions about how we should solve climate change and other environmental issues. Solarpunk is essentially implanting what we refer to as green urbanism, in contrast to gray urbanism. And don't be fooled, green urbanism isn't necessarily a positive thing. Green urbanism lines largely up with the aesthetics of Solarpunk. Plant trees, replace gas cars with electric cars, techno-innovate your way out of problems, assume future technology will fix problems, and largely focus on aesthetics over policies. Which is frustrating, because the average person largely agrees with these facets and thinks that many of these aspects do help with solving environmental issues. Which, yes, switching from a gas car to an electric car can help, but good job, you have changed one small thing in the chain of car dependency. Now we have to fix the automotive production process, the disposal of vehicles, tire shavings causing microplastics, road pollution, highway and city heat island effects from asphalt, urban sprawl, utility sprawl, inefficient housing from sprawl, and generally how disconnected society has become because of car isolation. I could go on, but I don't want to depress you too much. Anyway, green urbanism rarely touches these subjects and doesn't address fundamental issues. On the flip side, this is where gray urbanism excels in comparison. Gray urbanism is less about focusing on aesthetics and more about focusing on utility first. That city that's having problems with housing, gray urbanism pushes the idea that we should ignore most of the aesthetic NIMBY complaints and instead focus on building the damn housing and density first. Gray urbanism's focus is on fixing the fundamentals and caring about the small things later. And you're only going to do that with one thing: construction. Solarpunk seems to be absolutely allergic to heavy industry, resource extraction, and construction, which are all things that will continue to exist as long as society keeps functioning without some radical degrowth scheme. Which, to be clear, degrowth is bad, but maybe that deserves its own video. Resource extraction and mining specifically will always be required if you want to live in a modern society with devices that you interact with daily. That also includes many technologies that Solarpunk is based on, like solar panels. Speaking of infrastructure, let's take a look at this image. If you search Solarpunk on Google Images, one of the first pictures to usually pop up is this picture. This picture is incredibly funny to me because the train in that picture is one of the metro lines that I grew up nearby and rode many times as a kid into now being an adult. That's Patco, or the metro line that serves the South Jersey suburbs into Philadelphia. And this picture is a Photoshop of the Collingswood Patco station, and this picture, in my opinion, shows off everything wrong with Solarpunk. Here is what the Collingswood Patco station actually looks like. Surrounded by a sea of cars, this station is bad land use near a metro line. And covering it with plants and putting a walking trail through those plants isn't going to solve this issue. What will actually make this a sustainable and green place is to build dense housing where the parking lots currently are, so that if someone wants to ride the electric train into the city, they can just walk to the station instead of dragging their 2-ton lard barge around the block just to get to the station. This feeds back into the gray urbanism concept. The real solutions to sustainability often don't look or feel green, but they are the lifestyle-altering changes that we need to make. And oftentimes this gets overridden by people that call themselves environmentalists. So let's talk about that. Solarpunk is inherently a left-wing ideology, so any criticism to Solarpunk comes with criticism of leftist ideas and movements related to many of the issues that Solarpunk addresses. To finally get to the proper thesis of this video, we have to understand why and how leftists/progressives often counterintuitively drop unnecessary roadblocks in the path of their goals. To accomplish their goals, the progressive brain usually has two sides. One side argues that centralized authority will do nefarious things, so it should either be torn down or structured in a way so that it's hard for it to do bad things. This doesn't necessarily have to be a government structure per se, but generally this kind of thinking is what leads someone to blame the man, or likes to imagine themselves as David versus a Goliath. The other side of the progressive brain likes the concepts of making a large structure that's able to do great things and to do them efficiently. One clear example of this is the push for government universal healthcare here in America. Obviously a good thing and something that makes sense at scale. Where this gets confusing is with energy infrastructure, housing, and transportation. All three of these topics require a centralized planning structure, and for that structure to be very efficient with permitting and construction. Let's take building a new wind farm on a ridge near a town, for example. The problem here is that the two sides of the leftist progressive brain are going to fight each other on this topic. The one side knows that green infrastructure like wind turbines are necessary to fight climate change, while the other side doesn't trust the government officials or the company that's building the wind turbines, and often will want to protect the environment that the wind farm is going to be built on because they don't trust the government to respect it. This leads to the project getting hampered with page after page, form after form, environmental review after environmental review, to the point where construction hasn't even started yet, but 5 years has elapsed. 5 whole years where this town could have made the transition from burning coal to instead relying on clean wind power. But no, the environmentalists do not trust large power structures and instead continue to hurt the environment by delaying the wind farm project. Those environmental laws that were meant to protect nature are actively hurting it. Do you know what this sounds like?
I know a place
Can you imagine a real place that sounds like this?
where the grass is really greener.
A place where there's so many laws that they actually hamper progress and construction?
Warm,
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. It's California, baby. The 1970s were a weird decade. On one hand, you had some of the worst economic futures for the US, the most corrupt president, at the time, in the White House, and on the other hand, the hippie and progressive movements pushed for national and state powers to be expanded, especially when it came to environmental protections. These movements would eventually give us the federal EPA, and locally in California, they'd pass even stronger environmental laws called the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. CEQA was passed in good faith. There are good reasons to be skeptical of large structures like big corporations and nefarious landowners. And relating back to Solarpunk concepts, if you want a strong government to exist, which is implied with Solarpunk generally being non-capitalistic, you probably need similar oversight. So why does this turn into a problem? Well, the same laws that you just passed to protect the environment and to allow citizens to fight back against these malevolent forces also can be used to block any change whatsoever, or at least heavily slow down the process of construction. This is a significant problem when we have to build transit, housing, renewable energy, transmission lines, and high-speed rail. Solarpunk's aesthetic-heavy focus on greenery and vibes over substance gives us a great look into why these environmental laws are written in a way that damages long-term prospects. All you have to do is look at the average Californian or local activist's brain to see how a law like CEQA could be written in good faith but cause damage in the long term. Recently, we've had another California moment with a lawmaker wanting to block the sale of used diesel passenger locomotives. This happened because of Caltrain's sale of equipment to Peru, where they're going to be used as equipment for service for a commuter rail line out of Lima. For various reasons, the PR from the sale was not all positive, so in good faith, State Senator Dave Corstese put a bill forward to block the sale of future diesel trains. This kinda sucks. There are many places in the world that could use slightly used trains to increase or start new transit service. A perfect donor example of a developing nation that's clogged with congestion as such is Nashville, Tennessee. Back to why this is related to Solarpunk, that state senator acted in good faith with what he thought would be good for the environment because an old diesel locomotive must be terrible for the environment. But instead, some city is going to miss out on some extra rolling stock and continue to suffer from car dependency. Definitely not a very green decision in my eyes. Like I said before, Solarpunk is more than just an aesthetic. It is a vision of an ideology that does not exist. It is the magical land of farts and rainbows that the average starry-eyed liberal imagines a perfect future is like. And unfortunately, that vision has the same performative problems that the left-leaning activists and environmentalists generate. Not only does Solarpunk usually overlook heavy industry, rail freight, efficient logistics, nuclear power, construction, and mining, aka the things that make you go, hell yeah, brother. But Solarpunk also represents the legislative failures of American and generally left-leaning governments. Like, the average liberal has an idea of the correct things to do, but fails at envisioning how to execute those ideas in practice. Oftentimes, their own over-legislation causes them to trip and stumble, leaving places like California to be the punching bag by right-wingers to push their agendas. And no, I am not saying that leftists and liberals are bad, therefore right-wingers are correct. No, conservative right-wing politicians are evil morons that will crash the economy because their ego is too fragile. What I am saying is that Solarpunk represents the failures of liberalism in the US, and those real-life failures can be weaponized by conservatives to convince the median voter that liberals are bad. Trump and those around him are the result of liberals creating a government system that barely gets anything done because legislation gets in the way of politicians, or politicians refuse to lead and take accountability for anything. And no, this is not just the US either. Just look at the German Green Party if you want incompetency in another country with eco-friendly vibes. Just please don't notice all of those massive coal mines that are still open because those idiots closed their nuclear power plants. Meanwhile, their neighbor is making me into a Francophile. Solarpunk and its aesthetics can ironically be described as missing the forest for the trees, aka don't get caught up in that shiny green bullshit and let's focus on the essentials instead. Build the train, build the wind farm, build the solar panels, build the nuclear power plant, but don't let environmental regulations slow all of that progress down. Anyway, no matter what this current circle jerk of Neanderthals in the White House does to my country, we will need to rebuild afterwards with a better government. And I know that you, my audience, love to advocate for transit, cities, and rail. I want you to keep that up, no matter how bad things get, because when we come out on the other side, we will always need people like you to guide the way in your local community to show people that we can build a better world for them. And here's the plan to do that. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to join the discussion or talk about advocacy or something along those lines, you're welcome to join my Discord. You're welcome to follow me on my Instagram, my second channel, and check out the merch below too. Also, thank you to the sponsor for this video, Flexispot, and of course, thank you to my Patreons, who are the people that allow me to talk about these topics, and I otherwise couldn't. So, thank you, and if you want to support me, go check out the Patreon. I try to post more updates there, and I'm going to try to be a little bit more consistent in the future with these videos, because a pipe bursting in my apartment definitely didn't help. So let's get back on track.